What's up, guys? Golden Knight here. There's a good chance you've said at some point in your life that you're not a creative person. Maybe while looking at someone who always has ideas, who draws, writes, creates content, or solves problems in a different way, and thinking that this simply isn't for you. But what almost no one realizes is that this sentence doesn't describe who you are. It describes only a belief you've repeated so many times that it became true in your head. The truth is that creativity isn't a talent you either have or don't have. It's a skill that can be trained and developed, exactly like a muscle that's been inactive for a long time. What you need is to understand how your brain actually works when it comes to creating. In this video, we're going to break down this trap together, point by point. We'll go through essential points that will change how you relate to your own creativity. We'll talk about everything from the most common mistakes that stop you from creating to simple techniques you can start using today. The myth that creativity is a gift. From a very early age, we learn to separate people into two invisible groups. On one side, the creative ones. On the other, everyone else. This division happens at school, in the family, at work, and it keeps being reinforced without us even noticing. When someone draws well, writes a good essay, or comes up with a different idea, the label quickly appears: creative. And those who don't stand out in these areas learn to automatically place themselves outside that group. The problem is that this label creates a dangerous lie. It makes creativity seem like something genetic, like height or eye color. Either you're born with it or you're not. But creativity has never worked that way. It has always been the result of trial, repetition, mistakes, and accumulated experience. But because no one shows the process, only the final result, it's easy to believe that it came out of nowhere. When you believe that creativity is a gift, you give yourself a perfect excuse not to try. After all, if you weren't born creative, why insist? This belief protects you from failure, but it also keeps you stuck. Because every time an opportunity to create something appears, you already step in expecting it won't work. And that expectation kills any chance before the idea is even born. The truth is that creativity is much more like a muscle than a rare talent. The less you use it, the weaker it becomes. The more you exercise it, the more natural it feels. The problem is that no one ever taught you how to train it. Another important point is that creativity doesn't live only in art. Solving a problem, adapting a routine, explaining something in a simple way, improvising in the face of difficulty, all of this is creativity in action. But because these forms don't receive applause, you learn to ignore them. Little by little, you start believing that you've never created anything, even though you're creating all the time. Why you think you have no ideas, but you do. In almost every case, when someone says they have no ideas, what they're really saying is that they don't trust the ideas they have. The ideas do appear, but they're discarded too quickly. Before they even take shape, they're judged, compared, minimized. And because this judgment happens in seconds, what remains is a feeling of emptiness, as if nothing ever came up. This happens because most people confuse creativity with genius. There's a silent expectation that a good idea must be born ready, different, impressive. But ideas rarely start that way. And if you don't allow a bad idea to exist for a few minutes, it never gets the chance to evolve into something better. Another factor that reinforces this feeling is urgency. You sit down to create already expecting a result. You want to feel confidence, clarity, certainty. But the creative process is confusing by nature. It begins with doubt, with the feeling of being lost. When you interpret that confusion as incapacity, you give up far too early. There's also the weight of comparison. Today, you're constantly exposed to finished work. You compare the rough draft in your head to someone else's final product. And in that unfair comparison, any idea of yours seems weak. What's most interesting is that when you're relaxed, talking, joking, solving something without pressure, ideas come easily. This proves that the problem isn't a lack of creativity. It's the mental environment you create when you decide, now I need to have a good idea. That tension blocks exactly what you're trying to access. When you understand that the block isn't in the absence of ideas, but in the excess of judgment, you realize that creating isn't about forcing answers, but about allowing poorly formed questions. The role of boredom in real creativity. Boredom has a terrible reputation. From an early age, we learn that being bored is a waste of time, unproductive, something to be avoided. That's why, whenever a second of emptiness appears, our hand goes straight to the phone. But what almost no one realizes is that, by doing this, they're interrupting one of the mind's most fertile states. When you're bored, The brain doesn't receive enough external stimulation and begins to search for internal connections. It revisits memories, mixes old ideas, and creates unexpected associations. It's in this moment that insights emerge, insights that don't appear when you're too busy reacting to the world. At first, boredom is uncomfortable because it puts you face to face with your own thoughts. And many people interpret this as something negative. But in reality, this initial chaos is the soil where creativity grows. Walking without headphones, taking a shower without music, staring out the window without doing anything may seem like small actions, but they create huge openings for creative thinking. In this state, the mind stops following obvious paths and begins to explore shortcuts. Ideas that wouldn't arise in a stimulus-filled environment start to appear, not as ready-made answers, but as interesting questions. And good questions are the beginning of any meaningful creation. When you learn to tolerate boredom, you realize that creativity isn't something you need to chase. It shows up when you stop running from emptiness. Turn off autopilot mode. The first thing you need to understand is that creativity simply doesn't survive in completely predictable environments. When all your days look the same, when you wake up, take the same route, talk to the same people, consume the same content, and repeat the same habits, your brain switches into an energy-saving mode. It stops exploring. It stops asking questions. It stops looking for new connections. It just executes. It's like driving down a road you know with your eyes closed. You reach the destination, but you barely remember the journey. Creativity works in the exact opposite way. It's born when something breaks the pattern, when something grabs your attention, when your brain has to leave autopilot to understand what's happening. If nothing changes on the outside, nothing new happens on the inside. And the problem isn't the routine itself, it's the lack of variation within it. Many people think they need to do something big to be more creative, when in reality small changes already make a huge difference. Changing your route, talking to someone different, listening to a music genre you'd normally ignore, watching something completely outside your main interests. These small changes act like creative shocks. When you expose yourself to the new, even if it seems silly or random, your brain is forced to work in a different way. It starts comparing, feeling uncomfortable, trying to understand. And it's exactly in that effort that ideas emerge. Creativity doesn't show up when everything is too comfortable. It shows up when something pulls you, even slightly, out of the ordinary. Now stop and think honestly, when was the last time you did something for the first time? Don't wait for inspiration, create a routine. There's a very popular lie about creativity that causes many people to freeze without even realizing it. The idea that inspiration comes first and only then does action follow. As if creating were a magical event that happens out of nowhere, on a specific day, when everything aligns. The problem is that while you wait for this perfect moment, nothing gets done. And creativity that isn't practiced starts to rust. The truth is almost the opposite of what you were told. Instead of waiting for inspiration to appear, it's the act of sitting down and starting that makes it show up. Creativity responds to movement. It's like pushing a car that's standing still. At first, it's very heavy. After a while, it starts moving on its own. Every artist who produces consistently learned this the hard way. They don't create only when they feel inspired. They create because they have a schedule, a ritual, a commitment to themselves. Even on bad days. Even when it feels like nothing is good. And most of the time, it's exactly on those days that something unexpected appears after several minutes of frustrated attempts. The secret is to build a routine that doesn't pressure the result, but respects the process. It's not about sitting down to create something amazing. It's about sitting down to create, period. Sketching, writing anything, testing ideas without judgment. When this becomes a habit, your brain understands that this is a safe space. A place where making mistakes isn't failure, it's part of the path. Over time, the more you show up to create, the more your mind starts showing up with ideas. Feed your mind with rich references. Creativity doesn't arise from emptiness. No idea is born out of nothing. Everything you create is, in some way, a combination of things you've already seen, heard, felt, or experienced. The problem is that many people try to create while always drinking from the same source. They consume the same content, follow the same people, and observe the same kind of art. And then they wonder why everything they make feels repetitive or lifeless. The mind works like a kitchen. If you only have 2 ingredients, no matter how many times you try, the dish will come out similar. But when you start bringing in different ingredients, unexpected flavors, references that have nothing to do with each other, new combinations emerge. And that's exactly what makes an idea feel original, even if it's not completely new. That's why feeding your creativity means consciously expanding your repertoire, not only within your niche, but especially outside of it. An illustrator can learn a lot by observing architecture. A writer can unlock ideas by watching a random documentary. A musician can find new solutions by listening to a style they've never heard before. The more diverse your background, the more paths your brain will have to create unexpected connections. There's also a simple habit that makes a huge difference in this process: recording what catches your attention. Whenever something provokes you, moves you, or makes you feel curious or unsettled, write it down. You don't need to understand why in the moment. Over time, this collection of references becomes a true map of your creative mind, a place where old ideas meet new ones, waiting for the right moment to turn into something bigger. Allow yourself to be bad. There's a silent enemy that kills more ideas than a lack of technique or inspiration. Its name is perfectionism. That voice that shows up before you even start and tells you it won't be good, that it's not worth trying, that someone else has already done it better. That voice isn't trying to protect you. It's paralyzing you. Every creative skill goes through a mandatory phase that no one likes to admit: the bad phase. The first drawings are awkward. The first texts sound artificial. The first songs feel like nothing but noise. And that doesn't mean you're not cut out for it. It simply means you're at the beginning. There are no shortcuts. Anyone who creates well today created a lot of bad things yesterday. The problem is that many people confuse mistakes with failure. But mistakes are practice. They're information. Every attempt that doesn't work shows you what not to do next time. When you allow yourself to make mistakes, you speed up learning. When you try to get it right on the first try, you freeze before you even begin. Creativity needs space to play, to test absurd ideas. If you stop and think about it, how many ideas have already died just because they didn't seem good enough in that first moment? What if, instead of discarding them, you had kept going just a little longer? Connect unlikely ideas. At its core, creativity isn't about inventing something completely new from scratch. It's about seeing bridges where people don't usually look. It's about taking two or more ideas that live in different worlds and forcing a meeting between them. Most people think in a linear way. One concept leads to another similar one, which leads to more of the same. Creative thinking breaks that line. It crosses paths. When you allow yourself to play with unlikely combinations, your brain starts getting used to stepping outside the obvious. It stops searching for ready-made answers and starts exploring possibilities. At first, many ideas will seem useless or over the top. But among them, a few appear that can be refined later. This kind of exercise is powerful because it trains an essential creativity muscle: association. The more you practice connecting things that don't seem to fit, the more natural it becomes. And suddenly, ideas begin to surface at random moments, without conscious effort, because your brain has learned to do this work on its own. And now comes something important. This process doesn't happen only inside your head. It's much stronger when it happens in contact with other people. In the next point, you'll understand why the environment around you can either accelerate or completely suffocate your creativity. Surround yourself with creative people. Creativity doesn't develop in isolation for very long. When you spend too much time alone with your own ideas, they start to spin in circles. The same thoughts, the same doubts, the same blocks. Sometimes what's missing isn't more effort, but a different perspective pointing out something you can't see. Being around creative people completely changes the way you think. Not because they're better, but because they ask different questions. They see possibilities where you see problems. A simple conversation can unlock something that's been stuck for weeks, simply because of a new perspective. This connection doesn't have to be in person all the time. Online communities, study groups, collaborative projects, comments, feedback exchanges. When you share what you're creating, you take the idea out of your head and put it into the world. And when someone reacts to it, your mind automatically starts to expand, adjust, and improve. There's also a less talked about effect: helping others create. When you give input on someone else's project, suggest paths, or see solutions, you're training your own creativity without the pressure of ego. It's much easier to see solutions in other people's problems. And little by little, this ability starts to flow back into your own projects. Creativity is contagious. The right environments stimulate it. The wrong ones drain your energy. And that leads to an essential point that many people ignore. Take care of yourself. Many people treat creativity as something purely mental, as if ideas emerged in a vacuum, disconnected from the body. But the truth is simple and blunt. Your brain is a physical organ. It feels fatigue, hunger, stress, anxiety. And when the body is pushed to its limit, creativity is one of the first things to disappear. How many times have you tried to create while exhausted, sleeping poorly, with your head overloaded, and concluded that you were out of ideas? Most of the time, the problem wasn't a lack of creativity, it was a lack of energy. A tired brain doesn't explore, doesn't take risks, doesn't function. It just tries to survive the day. Taking care of your body isn't a luxury or generic advice. Sleeping better, drinking water, moving your body, eating in a minimally decent way, all of this changes how your mind works. The flow of ideas improves, patience increases, concentration grows. Sometimes, the solution to a creative block isn't thinking harder, but getting up from the chair and going for a walk. There are moments when pushing through is counterproductive. Breaks aren't giving up, they're part of the process. Walking, taking a shower, breathing deeply, sleeping. Many ideas appear precisely when you stop forcing them. You are already creative. You just need to remember that. There's a huge difference between not being creative and being disconnected from your own creativity. Most people haven't lost this ability. They've simply spent too much time hearing that they weren't good enough, that it wouldn't lead anywhere, that it was better to do something safer. Little by little, creating stopped being a space of freedom and became a place of pressure. And that's when the mind closes off. Creativity isn't a straight line. It looks much more like a maze. Sometimes you move forward quickly. Other times you get completely lost. You'll hit walls, take detours, feel like you're going in circles. But every attempt leaves a mark. Every sketch teaches something. Even when you feel like you haven't moved at all, you've changed on the inside. When you understand this, creating stops being a test of worth and becomes a process of discovery. You stop asking whether you're good enough and start asking what happens if you keep going just a little longer. And that's when things really begin to flow. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Don't forget to take a look at the description. There are several important links there that can help you even more. See you in the next video.